Hello, hello, billionairettes. Welcome. Hope you're having an amazing, beautiful day so far, wherever you are in the world. Let me know in the comments, where are you listening in from? Would love to connect further. We're diving into part three of this chapter, The Vulnerability Armory in Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. I hope you are enjoying it. Would love to know your feedback, your thoughts. I know we've had a lot of people joining in and reading along with us. So glad, happy, and grateful that you are here. My name is Vanessa Black. If this is the first time we are connecting, and I'm so glad you're here and in this space. And looking to develop and grow on a daily basis. That's what we do here. We develop our minds, our bodies, and our souls on a daily basis because personal freedom is a priority for us, as well as financial freedom. We deserve it, and it is ours. It's just a matter of learning all this information, taking in this knowledge, implementing it, studying it, and freeing ourselves. Free yourself with this information that we are listening to, and grow wiser so that you can continue to become, who you envision in your mind and achieve all the goals and dreams that you have. It is absolutely possible. It is right there. If you can think it in your mind, you can hold it in your hand. Okay. So let's continue to dive into it. I'm so glad you're here. I'm one of the owners and founders of Billionairette. And our mission is to impact billions of souls all over the world. And we're doing this every single day right now. We're on Instagram, Billionairette, this YouTube channel. We're literally posting different Read With Me sessions on 2 books that we've been reading every single day or every single month this year. And we've read this is 24 books now that we have read this year so far. So go check the playlist, go check out what books, okay, we've read this year. You can listen into whichever one speaks to you. We have the personal freedom books as well as financial freedom books on that playlist. Okay. There's some of the top books that have impacted our lives, Isabel and myself. And we wanted to read them out loud. And also in that reading out loud, we have been able to, continue to develop as well. It's not just about reading at one time. It's about studying and taking action and really implementing what we're learning on a daily basis as well. That's how we really, really can learn and understand what we're reading. So we're big believers in that. And let's continue to dive into it. Page 152, Daring Greatly, The Vulnerability Armory. Okay, phenomenal book so far. Understanding shame, understanding vulnerability, and all the amazingness. And it's very, very data driven. Okay. Very data driven. Brené Brown is a researcher. So this is not just made up stuff. This is from all the interviews that she has done on these specific topics and gathered all the data and put it in this book. Okay. So, which is really, really phenomenal. So let's dive right into it. I know Isabel right now is reading From Good to Great. And so if you want to check that out, From Going From Good to Great, that is very data driven as well. And it's a phenomenal book if you want to develop your leadership and all of that good stuff. So let's dive right into it. I'm so glad we're connected. Go ahead and share this book or this specific audio if you find value from it and you feel somebody else in your circle, in your world will feel and experience that value. Or maybe they need to hear that one sentence, that one paragraph that's like mind-blowing, okay, going into this next year. So let's do it. Let's get right into it. Unlike some participants who had intellectual or theoretical issues with the value of vulnerability, these folks shared the belief that everyone without exception belongs to one of 2 mutually exclusive groups. Either you're a victim in life, a sucker, or a loser who's always being taken advantage of and can't hold your own, or you're a Viking. Okay. Someone who sees the threat of being victimized as a constant. So you stay in control, you dominate, you exert power over things, and you never show vulnerability. So as I coded the data from these interviews, I kept thinking about the chapter in my dissertation on the French philosopher Jacques Derrida and binary opposition, the pairing of related terms that are opposite. While the respondents didn't all use the same examples, a strong pattern of paired opportunities emerged in the language they used to describe their worldview. Winner or loser, survive or die, kill or be killed, strong or weak, leaders or followers, success or failure, crush or be crushed. And in case those aren't clear enough examples, there is the life motto of a high achieving, take no prisoners lawyer. The world is divided into a-holes and suckers. It is that simple. The source of their Viking or victim worldview was not completely clear, but most attributed it to the values they had been taught growing up, the experiences of surviving hardships, or their professional training. The majority of the participants who fell into the group holding this view were men, but there were also women. It makes sense that this is somewhat gendered issues, as many men, even men who don't rely on this armor, talked about the win, lose, zero-sum power dynamic being taught and modeled as they grew up. And don't forget, winning, dominance, and power over women were part of the list of masculine norms that we discussed in chapter 3. In addition to socialization and life experiences, many of these folks held jobs or worked in cultures that reinforced the Viking or victim mentality. We heard this from servicemen and women veterans, corrections and law enforcement of officers, and people working in high performance, super competitive cultures like law, technology, and finance. What I don't know is if these folks sought careers that leverage their existing Viking or victim belief system, or if their work experiences shape this win or lose take on life. My guess would be that a larger percentage of folks belong to the former group, but I don't have the data to do more than speculate. It's something we're researching now. One issue that made these interviews some of the most difficult was the honesty with which people spoke about the struggles in their personal lives, dealing with high-risk behaviors, divorces, disconnection, loneliness, addiction, anger, exhaustion. But rather than seeing these behaviors and negative outcomes as consequences of their Viking or victim worldview, they perceive them as evidence of the harsh win or lose nature of life. When I look at these statistics in more vulnerability intolerant Viking or victim professions, I see a dangerous pattern developing. And no place is this more evident than in the military. The statistics on post-traumatic stress-related suicides, violence, addiction, and risk-taking all point to this haunting truth. For soldiers serving in Afghanistan and Iraq, coming home is more lethal than being in combat. From the invasion of Afghanistan to the summer of 2009, the U.S. military lost 761 soldiers in combat in that country. Compare that to the 817 who took their own lives over the same period. And this number doesn't account for deaths related to violence, high-risk behaviors, and addiction. Craig Bryan, a University of Texas psychologist and suicide expert who recently left the Air Force, told Time magazine that the military finds itself in a catch-22. Quote, "We train our warriors to use controlled violence and aggression, to suppress strong emotional reactions in the face of adversity, to tolerate physical and emotional pain, and to overcome the fear of injury and death. These qualities are also associated with increased risk for suicide." Bryan then explained that the military can't decrease the intensity of that conditioning, quote, "without negatively affecting the fighting capability of our military." And he gave chilling expression to the inherent danger of looking at the world through the Viking or victim lens for those in the military when he noted, "Service members are, simply put, more capable of killing themselves by sheer consequence of their professional training. The situation may be at its most extreme in the military, but if you look at the mental and physical health statistics of police officers, you'll find the same thing. The same holds true in organizations. When we lead, teach, or preach from a gospel of Viking or victim, win or lose, we crush faith, innovation, creativity, and adaptability to change." Just highlighting some sentences here. So in organizations, when we lead, teach, or preach from a gospel of Viking or victim, win or lose, we crush faith, innovation, creativity, and adaptability to change. Take away the guns, in fact, and we find outcomes similar to those for soldiers and police in corporate America. Lawyers, an example of a profession largely trained in win or lose, succeed or fail, have outcomes that aren't much better. The American Bar Association reports that suicides among lawyers are close to 4 times greater than the rate of the general population. An American Bar Association journal article reported that experts on lawyer depression and substance abuse attributed the higher suicide rates to lawyers, perfectionism, and on their need to be aggressive and emotionally detached. And this mentality can trickle down into our home lives as well. When we teach or model to our children that vulnerability is dangerous and should be pushed away, we lead them directly into danger and disconnection. The Viking or victim armor doesn't just perpetuate behaviors such as dominance, control, and power over folks who see themselves as Vikings. It can also perpetuate a sense of ongoing victimhood for people who constantly struggle with the idea that they're being targeted or unfairly treated. With this lens, there are only 2 possible positions that people can occupy: power over or powerless. In the interviews, I heard many participants sound resigned to victims simply because they didn't want to become the only alternative, in their opinion, Vikings. Reducing our life options to such limited and extreme roles leaves very little hope for transformation and meaningful change. I think that's why there's often a sense of desperation and feeling boxed in around this perspective. Page 155. Daring greatly, redefining success, reintegrating vulnerability, and seeking support. To examine how the research participants moved from Viking or victim to engaging in vulnerability, there was a clear distinction between those who operated from this belief system because it's what they learned or it's the value they hold, and those who rely on this life lens as a result of trauma. Ultimately, the question that best challenges the logic behind Viking or victim for both groups is this: how are you defining success? Question to ask: how do you define success? Put it in the comments. And maybe even thinking like, what's the first thing that comes to your mind? And then looking at it. It turns out that in this win or lose, succeed or fail paradigm, Vikings are not victorious by any metric that most of us would label success. Survival or winning may be success in the middle of competition, combat, or trauma. But when the immediacy of that threat is removed, merely surviving is not living. As I mentioned earlier, love and belonging are irreducible needs of men, women, and children, and love and belonging are impossible to experience without vulnerability. Living without connection, without knowing love and belonging, is not victory. Fear and scarcity fuel the Viking or victim approach, and part of the reintegrating vulnerability means examining shame triggers. What's fueling the win or lose fear? ? The men and women who made the shift from this paradigm to wholeheartedness all talk about cultivating trust and connection in relationships as a prerequisite for trying on a less combative way of engaging with the world. As far as connection and the military is concerned, I'm not advocating for a kinder, gentler fighting force. I understand the realities faced by nation and the soldiers who protect them. What I am advocating is a kinder, gentler public, one willing to embrace, support, and reach out to the men and women we pay to be invulnerable on our behalf. Are we willing to reach out and connect? A great example of how connection can heal and transform is the work being done by Team Red, White, and Blue, Team RWB.org. According to their mission statement, they believe that most effective way to impact a veteran's life is through a meaningful relationship with someone in their community. Their program pairs wounded veterans with local volunteers. Together, they share meals, attend the veterans' medical appointments, go to local sporting events, and engage in other social activities. This interaction allows veterans to grow in their community, meet supportive people, and find new passions in life. My interest in this work was not only stemmed from my research, but also from an extraordinary experience I had working with a group of veterans and military family members on a shame resilience project in one of my classes at the University of Houston. It changed my life and made me realize how much we, the public, can do for veterans and why our politics and beliefs about war shouldn't stop us from reaching out to them with vulnerability, compassion, and connection. I will always be grateful for that experience and for what I've learned interviewing veterans about their experiences. For many of us who grieve over the wounds of war, we're missing an opportunity for healing that's right in front of us. Team RWB's motto, "It's our turn," is a call to action for all of us who want to do something to support vets. I'm working with them now, and I invite everyone to find a way to reach out. Dare greatly and take actions that communicate to veterans or military families that they are not alone. Excuse me. Actions that communicate. Quote, "Your struggle is my struggle. Your trauma is my trauma. Your healing is my healing." Trauma and daring greatly. We all struggle to understand why some people who have survived trauma, be it combat, domestic violence, sexual or physical abuse, or the quieter but equally devastating covert traumas of oppression, neglect, isolation, or living in extreme fear or stress, exhibit tremendous resilience and lead full, wholehearted lives, while others become defined by their trauma. They may become perpetrators themselves of the violence they suffer. They struggle with addiction, or they're unable to escape the feeling that they are victims in situations when they're not. After studying shame for 6 years, I knew that part of the answer was shame resilience. The people with the most resilience intentionally cultivated the 4 elements that we discussed in the earlier chapters. The other part of the answers felt elusive to me until I started my new research interviewing people about wholeheartedness and vulnerability. Then it made perfect sense. If we're forced into seeing the world through the Viking or victim lens as a survival mechanism, then it can feel impossible or even deadly to let go of that worldview. How can we expect someone to give up a way of seeing and understanding the world that has physically, cognitively, or emotionally kept them alive? That's deep. That is deep. In understanding, there's forgiveness. None of us is ever able to part with our survival strategies without significant support and the cultivation of replacement strategies. Putting down the Viking or victim shield often requires help from a professional, someone who understands trauma. Groups are also very helpful. The research participants who survived trauma and are living wholehearted lives spoke passionately about the need to, and I'm going to list these 4 things. The need to acknowledge the problem, seek professional help and or support, work through the accompanying shame and secrecy, and approach the reintegration of vulnerability as a daily practice rather than a checklist item. And while the importance of spirituality saturated all of the interviews with the wholehearted, it emerged as especially important with the participants who consider themselves not only trauma survivors, but also thrivers. The shield, letting it all hang out. I see 2 forms of oversharing in our culture. The first is what I called floodlighting, and the other is a smash and grab. As we discuss in the chapter on vulnerability myths, oversharing is not vulnerability. In fact, it often results in disconnection, distrust, and disengagement. The shield, floodlighting. To understand floodlighting, we have to see that the intentions behind this kind of sharing are multifaceted and often include some combinations of soothing one's pain, testing the loyalty and tolerance in a relationship, and or hot wiring a new connection. Quote, we've only known each other for a couple of weeks, but I'm going to share this and we'll be BFFs now. Unfortunately for all of us who've done this, and I include myself in this group, the response is normally the opposite of what we're looking for. People recoil and shut down, compounding our shame and disconnection. You can't use vulnerability to discharge your own discomfort or as a tolerance barometer in a relationship. I'll share this and see if you stick around. Or to fast forward a relationship, it just won't operate. Ordinarily, when we reach out and share ourselves, our fears, hopes, struggles, and joy, we create small sparks of connection. Our shared vulnerability creates light in normally dark places. My metaphor for this is twinkle lights. I keep them in my house year-round as a reminder. There's something magical about the idea of twinkle lights shining in the dark in difficult places. The lights are small, and a single light is not very special, but an entire strand of sparkling lights is sheer beauty. It's the connectivity that makes them beautiful. When it comes to vulnerability, connectivity means sharing our stories with people who have earned, and she has this in different font, earned the right to hear them. People with whom we've cultivated relationships that can bear the weight of our story. Is there trust? That's a question. Is there mutual empathy? Question. Is there reciprocal sharing? Question. Can we ask for what we need? Question. These are the crucial connection questions, and this is something that could possibly may be beneficial to write down. These are the questions. Is there trust? I'll repeat them. Is there mutual empathy? Is there reciprocal sharing? Can we ask for what we need? Those are the 4. When we share vulnerability, especially shame stories, with someone with whom there is no connectivity, their emotional and sometimes physical response is often to wince, as if we have shone a floodlight in their eyes. Instead of a strand of delicate lights, our shared vulnerability is blinding, harsh, and unbearable. If we are on the receiving end, our hands fly up and cover our faces. We squeeze our entire faces, not just our eyes, shut, and we look away. When it's over, we feel depleted, confused, and sometimes even manipulated. Not exactly the empathic response that those telling the stories were hoping for. Even for those of us who study empathy and teach empathy skills, it's rare that we're able to stay attuned when someone's oversharing has stretched us past our connectivity with them. Caring greatly, clarifying intentions, setting boundaries, and cultivating connection. Much of the beauty of light owes its existence to the dark. The most powerful moments of our lives happen when we string together the small flickers of light created by courage, compassion, and connection, and see them shine in the darkness of our struggles. That darkness is lost when we use vulnerability to floodlight our listener, and the response is disconnection. Floodlighting. We then use this disconnection as verification that we'll never find comfort, that we're not worthy, that the relationship is no good, or in the case of oversharing, to hotwire a connection that will never have the intimacy that we crave. We think, quote, vulnerability is a crock. It's not worth it, and I'm not worth it. What we don't see is that using vulnerability is not the same thing as being vulnerable. It's the opposite. It's armor. This is making a lot of sense. Are you getting this? Sometimes we're not even aware that we're oversharing as armor. We can purge our vulnerability or our shame stories out of a total desperation to be heard. We blurt out something that is causing us immense pain because we can't bear the thought of holding it in for one more second. Our intentions may not be purging or blurting to armor ourselves or push others away, but that's the exact outcomes of our behavior. Whether we're on the purging end or the receiving end of this experience, self-compassion is critical. We have to give ourselves a break when we share too much too soon. And we have to practice self-kindness when we feel like we weren't able to hold space for someone who hit us with the floodlight. Judgment exacerbates disconnection. Hearing this, sometimes people ask me how I decide what to share and how to share it when it comes to my own work. I share a lot of myself in my work, after all, and I certainly have cultivated trusting relationships with all of you or all of the people in the audiences where I speak. It's an important question, and the answer is that I don't tell stories or share vulnerabilities with the public until I work through them with the people I love. I have my own boundaries around what I share and what I don't share, and I stay mindful of my intention. It's great. It's a great question that people may be asking, especially in the time of social media. There's a lot of people in audience. It's like, yeah, I want to be vulnerable, but what do I actually share? What are the boundaries here? And am I using it as a floodlight, or am I using it? What's my intention around it? And hers, I'm going to repeat it one more time. I don't tell stories or share vulnerabilities with the public until I've worked through them with the people that I love. I have my own boundaries around with what I share and what I don't share, and I stay mindful of my intentions. First, I only share stories or experiences that I've worked through and feel that I can share from a solid ground. I don't share what I define as intimate stories, nor do I share stories that are fresh wounds. I did that once or twice early in my career, and it was pretty terrible. There's nothing like staring into an audience of 1,000 people who are all giving you the floodlight look. Second, I follow the rule that I learned in my graduate social work training. Sharing yourself to teach or move a process forward can be healthy and effective. But disclosing information as a way to work through your personal stuff is inappropriate and unethical. That's good. That's really, really good. Last, I only share when I have no unmet needs that I'm trying to fill. I firmly believe that being vulnerable with a larger audience is only a good idea if healing is tied to the sharing, not to the expectations I might have for the response that I get. When I asked other people who share their stories through blogs, books, and public speaking about this, it turns out that they're very similar in their approaches and intentions. I don't want the fear of floodlighting to stop anyone from sharing their struggles with the world, but being mindful about what, why, and how we share is important when the context is a larger public. We are all grateful for people who write and speak in ways that help us remember that we're not alone. If you recognize yourself in the shield, this checklist might help. Why am I sharing this? What outcome am I hoping for? What emotions am I experiencing? Do my intentions align with my values? Is there an outcome, response, or lack of response that will hurt my feelings? Is this sharing in the service of connection? Am I genuinely asking the people in my life for what I need? I'm going to repeat those questions one more time. These are the questions to ask ourselves when we're sharing, right? Why am I sharing this? What outcome am I hoping for? What emotions am I experiencing? Do my intentions align with my values? Is there an outcome, response, or lack of a response that will hurt my feelings? Is this sharing in the service of connection? Am I genuinely asking the people in my life for what I need? The shield, the smash and grab. If floodlighting is about misusing vulnerability, the second form of oversharing is all about using vulnerability as a manipulation tool. A smash and grab job is where a burglar smashes the door or a store window and grabs what he or she can. It's sloppy, unplanned, and desperate. The smash and grab used as vulnerability armor is about smashing through people's social boundaries with intimate information, then grabbing whatever attention and energy you can get your hands on. We see this most often in celebrity culture, where sensationalism thrives. Unfortunately, teachers and school administrators have told me that they see this same smash and grab behavior in students as young as middle school kids. Unlike floodlighting, which at least comes from a place of needing confirmation of our worthiness, this purported disclosure of vulnerability feels less real. I haven't interviewed enough people who engage in this behavior to fully understand the motivation, but what's emerged so far is attention seeking. Of course, worthiness issues can and do underpin attention seeking, but in our social media world, it's increasingly difficult to determine what's a real attempt to connect and what's performance. The only thing I do know is that it's not vulnerability. Page 164, daring greatly, questioning intentions. This self-exposure instead feels one-directional, and for those who engage in it, an audience appears to be more desirable than intimate connection. If we find ourselves engaging in a smash and grab, I think the reality check questions are the same as the ones in the section on floodlighting. I think it's also important to ask, quote, what need is driving this behavior? And, quote, am I trying to reach, hurt, or connect with someone specifically? And is this the right way to do it? The shield, serpentining. I'm not someone who typically enjoys slapstick humor or screwball comedies. I much prefer a good romantic comedy or one of those painfully slow, character-driven Miramax movies. That makes the movie clip that I'm using as a metaphor for this particular vulnerability protection mechanism seem odd. But honestly, every time I watch this movie, I laugh so hard that my face hurts. Just thinking about it makes me start laughing. The movie is the 1979 comedy The In-Laws, starring Peter Falk and Alan Arkin. On the eve of their children's weddings, dentist Sheldon Cornpet meets Vince Ricardo. Sheldon is the bride's father, and Vince is the groom's. Arkin's character is an anxious, regimented, straight-laced dentist. Falk's character is a CIA operative who appears to have gone rogue and who thinks nothing of car chases and shootouts. As you probably guessed, the lovable but reckless agent drags the unsuspecting dentist into his far-flung misadventures. The movie is really corny, but Peter Falk is brilliant as an outrageous agent, and Alan is a perfect, uptight, straight man. My favorite scene is when Falk tells a terrified Arkin to avoid a flurry of bullets by running into a zigzag pattern. They're totally exposed on an airport runway while being shot at by multiple snipers, and his best advice is serpentine, shell, serpentine. At one point, the dentist miraculously makes it to the shelter, but then remembers that he didn't serpentine, so he runs back into the line of fire so he can zigzag his way back to cover. I'm totally into this, so I put the 2-minute clip on my website. Scroll down to the bottom of the page and you'll see it, brenebrown.com/videos. I don't know why it cracks me up, but I laugh out loud every time I see it. Maybe it's the visual of a wild-eyed Peter Falk running back and forth yelling serpentine. Maybe it's because I remember watching it with my dad and brother and falling out. To this day, if things are getting tense in a family conversation, one of us will nonchalantly say serpentine, and we'll all laugh. Serpentining is a perfect metaphor for how to spend enormous energy trying to dodge vulnerability when it would take far less effort to face it straight on. The image also conveys how fruitless it is to think of zigzagging in the face of something as expansive and all-consuming as vulnerability. Serpentining means trying to control a situation, backing out of it, pretending it's not happening, or maybe even pretending that you don't care. We use it to dodge conflict, discomfort, possible confrontation, the potential for shame, hurt, and/or criticism, self or other inflicted. Serpentining can lead to hiding out, pretending, avoidance, procrastination, rationalizing, blaming, and lying. I have a tendency to want to serpentine when I feel vulnerable. If I have to make a difficult call, I'll try to script both sides of it. I'll convince myself that I should wait. I'll draft an email while telling myself that it's better in writing, and I'll think of a million other things to do. I'll emotionally run back and forth until I'm exhausted. Daring greatly. Being present, paying attention, moving forward. Page 166. When I catch myself trying to zigzag my way out of vulnerability, it always helps to have Peter Falk's voice in my head shouting, "Serpentine, Shell." It makes me laugh, which forces me to breathe. Breathing and humor are great ways to reality check our behaviors and to start engaging with vulnerability. Serpentining is draining, and running back and forth to avoid something is not a good way to live. As I was trying to come up with the occasions when serpentining might be useful, I thought about the advice that I once received from an old guy who lived in Louisiana swamp. My parents took my brother and me to fish in the channels running through the swamp, some swampland owned by the company my dad worked for in New Orleans. The man who led us onto the property said, quote, if a gator comes at you, run a zigzag pattern. They're quick, but they ain't good at making turns. Well, a gator did lunge out of the water and ate the end of my mom's fishing pole, but we never were chased. And as it turns out, the whole thing is a myth anyway. According to the experts at San Diego Zoo, we can easily outrun an alligator, zigzagging or not. They max out at a speed of around 10 or 11 miles per hour. And more importantly, they can't run very far. They depend on surprise attacks, not chasing down their prey. In that sense, they're very much like the gremlins that live in the shame swamplands and keep us from being vulnerable. So we don't need to serpentine. We just need to be present, pay attention, and move forward. The shield: cynicism, criticism, cool, and cruelty. If you decide to walk into the arena and dare greatly, you're going to get kicked around. It doesn't matter if your arena is politics or the PTO, or if your great dare is an article for your school newsletter, a promotion, or selling a piece of pottery on Etsy. You're going to be on the receiving end of some cynicism and criticism before it's over. There may even be some plain old mean-spiritedness. Why? Because cynicism, criticism, cruelty, and cool are even better than armor. They can be fashioned into weapons that not only keep vulnerability at a distance, but also can inflict injury on the people who are being vulnerable and making us uncomfortable. Dang, dang, dang. If we are the kind of people who don't do vulnerability, there's nothing that makes us feel more threatened and more incited to attack and shame people than to see someone daring greatly. That's big. I'm going to repeat that. If we are the kind of people who, quote, don't do vulnerability, there's nothing that makes us feel more threatened and more incited to attack and shame people than to see someone daring greatly. Someone else's daring provides an uncomfortable mirror that reflects back our own fears about showing up, creating, and letting ourselves be seen. That's why we come out swinging. When we see cruelty, vulnerability is likely to be the driver. When I say criticism, I don't mean productive feedback, debate, and disagreement over the value of importance of a contribution. I'm talking about put downs, personal attacks, and substantiated claims about our motivations and intentions. When I talk about cynicism, I don't mean healthy skepticism and questioning. I'm talking about the reflexive cynicism that leans to mindless responses like, quote, "That's so stupid," or, quote, "What a loser idea." Cool is one of the most rampant forms of cynicism. Whatever. Totally lame. So uncool. Who gives a shiz? Among some folks, it's almost as if enthusiasm and engagement have become a sign of gullibility. Being too excited or invested makes you lame, a word that we ban in our house along with loser and stupid. In the introduction to the chapter, I talked about adolescence as a starting line for the race to the armory. Cynicism and cool are currency of the realm in middle and high school. Every single student in my daughter's middle school wears a hoodie every single day, even when it's 95 degrees outside. Not only do these jackets shield vulnerability by being the ultimate in cool accessories, but I'm pretty sure the kids think of them as invisibly cloaks. They literally disappear inside them. They're a way to hide. When the hoods are up and the hands are hidden in the pocket, they scream disengagement. Too cool to care. As adults, we can also protect ourselves from vulnerability with cool. We worry about being perceived as laughing too loud, buying in, caring too much, being too eager. We don't wear hoodies as often, but we can use our titles, education, background, and position as handles on the shields of criticism, cynicism, cool, and cruelty. I can talk to you this way or blow you off because of who I am or what I do for a living. And make no mistake, when it comes to this shield, handles are also fashioned out of the nonconformity and rejection of traditional status markers. I dismiss you because you sold out and you spend your life in a cubicle, or I'm more relevant and interesting because I rejected the trappings of higher education, traditional employment, etc. Oh no, did I lose my page? No, I got it. Just little water break here. Cheers. Daring greatly, tightrope walking, practicing shame, resilience, and reality checking. This is daring greatly. And a couple more pages and then we're on to chapter 5. Daring greatly. Over the course of 1 year, I interviewed artists, writers, innovators, business leaders, clergy, and community leaders about these issues and how they stayed open. Excuse me. I'm going to pause this for a second. All right. Over the course of 1 year, I interviewed artists, writers, innovators, business leaders, clergy, and community leaders about these issues and how they stayed open to the constructive criticism while filtering out the mean-spirited attacks. Basically, I want to know how they maintain the courage to keep on walking in the arena. I'll confess that I was motivated by my own struggle to learn how to keep daring. When we stop caring about what people think, we lose our capacity for connection. When we become defined by what people think, we lose our willingness to be vulnerable. If we dismiss all the criticism, we lose out on important feedback. But if we subject ourselves to the hatefulness, our spirits get crushed. It's a tightrope. Shame resilience is the balance bar. And the safety net below is the 1 or 2 people in our lives who can help us reality check the criticism and cynicism. I'm very visual. So I have a picture of a person on a tightrope hanging over my desk to remind me that working to stay open and at the same time to keep boundaries in place is worth the energy and risk. I actually used a Sharpie to write this across the balance bar. Quote, worthiness is my birthright. It's both a reminder to practice shame resilience and a touchstone of my spiritual beliefs. And in case I'm not feeling more ornery than usual, I have a little post-it note under my tightrope picture that reads, quote, cruelty is cheap, easy, and chicken shit. That's also a touchstone of my spiritual beliefs. The research participants who had used criticism and cynicism in the past as a way to protect themselves from vulnerability had some very powerful wisdom to share about their transition to wholeheartedness. Many of them said that they grew up with parents who modeled that behavior and that they weren't aware of how fully they had mimicked it until they started investigating their own fear of being vulnerable, trying new things, and engaging. These folks were not egomaniacs who took pleasure in cutting down other people. In fact, they were consistently harder on themselves than they were on other people. So their mean-spiritedness wasn't only directed outward, even if they admitted that they often used it to lessen their own self-doubt. The first sentence of the, quote, daring greatly quote from Theodore Roosevelt says a lot. It's not the critic who counts. And for the men and women I've interviewed who define themselves as a critic, the not counting was definitely felt. They often struggled with feeling dismissed and invisible in their own lives. Criticizing was a way to be heard. When I asked how they moved from hurtful criticism to constructive criticism and from cynicism to contribution, they described a process that mirrored shame resilience, understanding what triggered their attack, what it means about their own sense of self-worth, talking to people they trust about it, and asking for what they need. Many of these folks had to dig deep about the cool issue. How did being perceived as cool become a driving value? And what was the cost of pretending that things didn't matter? The fear of being vulnerable can unleash cruelty, criticism, and cynicism in all of us. Making sure we take responsibility for what we say is one way that we can check our intentions. Dare greatly and put your name on your posted comments online. If you don't feel comfortable owning it, then don't say it. And if you're reading this and you have control over online sites that allow comments, then you should dare greatly and make users sign in and use real names and hold the community responsible for creating a respectful environment. Like that. If you don't feel comfortable owning it, then don't say it. And if you're reading this and you have control over online sites that allow these comments, then you should dare greatly and make users sign in and use real names. In addition to walking the tightrope, practicing shame resilience, and cultivating a safety net community that supports me when I'm feeling attacked or hurt, I've implemented 2 additional strategies. The first is simple. I only accept and pay attention to feedback from people who are also in the arena. If you're occasionally getting your butt kicked as you respond, and if you're also figuring out how to stay open to feedback without getting pummeled by insults, I'm more likely to pay attention to your thoughts about my work. If, on the other hand, you're not helping, contributing, or wrestling with your own gremlins, I'm not at all interested in your commentary. The second strategy is also simple. I carry a small sheet of paper in my wallet that has written on it the names of people whose opinions of me matter. To be on that list, you have to love me for my strengths and struggles. You have to know that I'm trying to be wholehearted, but I still cuss too much, flip people off under the steering wheel, and have both Lawrence Welk, and Metallica on my iPod. You have to know and respect that I'm totally uncool. There's a great quote from movie Almost Famous that says, quote, the only true currency in this bankrupt world is what you share with someone else when you're uncool. To be on my list, you have to be what I call, quote, stretch mark friend. Our connection has been stretched and pulled so much that it's become part of who we are, a second skin, and there are a few scars to prove it. We're totally uncool with each other. I don't think anyone has more than one or two people who qualify for that list. The important thing is not to discount the stretch mark friends to gain the approval of the strangers who are being mean and nasty or are too cool. Nothing serves as a better reminder of that than the immortal words of my friend Scott Stratton, author of Unmarketing. Don't try to win over the haters. You're not the jackass whisperer. And that concludes chapter 4. What an awesome chapter. Especially this part 3 was really, really amazing. A lot of clarity on vulnerability. What is too much, and it crosses a line of it's not vulnerability, and what is. Some great insight based on Brene's, sharing and gathering of the data. I think this is a real good one. So I'm going to end this read with me session with a reminder of the questions that we can ask ourselves to see, is this an alignment? Am I being vulnerable, or am I not being vulnerable? And am just looking for attention or something else, right? So sharing yourself to teach or move a process forward can be healthy and effective, but disclosing information as a way to work through your personal stuff is inappropriate and unethical. She says, lastly, I only share when I have no unmet needs that I'm trying to fill. I firmly believe that being vulnerable with a larger audience is only a good idea if the healing is tied to the sharing, not to the expectations I might have for the response that I get. These are the questions. So if you recognize yourself in the shield that she mentioned of floodlighting, which means just sharing too much, too quickly to the wrong people. If you recognize that, this is a checklist that might help to ask these questions. Why am I sharing this? What outcome am I hoping for? What emotions am I experiencing? Do my intentions align with my values? Is there an outcome, response, or lack of a response that will hurt my feelings? Is this sharing in the service of connection? Am I genuinely asking the people in my life for what I need? And with that, ladies and gentlemen, the few that might be here, billionairettes, that is chapter 4. And chapter 5, which we are going to dive into in the next Read With Me session shortly, so don't go too far, is the mind the gap. So chapter 5, mind the gap, cultivating change and closing the disengagement divide. We're going to be diving into that very shortly here. So appreciate you. Would love to hear your thoughts. Would love to get your feedback. Hopefully this was valuable to you. I know it was valuable for me. Appreciate you. Love you. Have a beautiful rest of your day, and we'll see you in the next episode. All right. Take care and talk to you soon.